The family had always dreamed of living in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other and life felt peaceful. When they finally found the perfect house, it was everything they had hoped for. The street was lined with trees, the sidewalks were clean, and the houses looked well cared for. It seemed like the kind of place where kids could play outside safely, neighbors could wave to each other in the morning, and people respected each other's space. At first, everything went smoothly. The family spent the first few weeks unpacking, decorating, and getting used to their new surroundings. Their neighbors were polite, smiling and introducing themselves whenever they saw them outside. Life felt calm, and the parents felt a sense of relief that they had found a home that promised stability and peace. But soon, little things began to change. It started with a letter in the mailbox that seemed harmless at first. It was from the Homeowners Association, or HOA as they called it. The letter mentioned new rules about outdoor equipment, wires, and internet connections. The language was strict, almost intimidating, and the family wasn't sure what to make of it. They had just moved in and didn't even know about these rules. But the letter suggested that they should comply immediately or face consequences. The parents felt a knot in their stomachs. They had moved here to escape stress, not to find themselves caught in arguments about cables and rules they didn't even know existed. The letter said that any outdoor cables or internet equipment had to be approved by the HOA and installed in a certain way. The family didn't have anything unusual, just a simple Wi-Fi setup to make sure everyone in the house could work, study, and stream shows without problems. Still, the letter implied that their current setup was already in violation of some obscure rule. The parents tried to reach out to the HOA office, but the responses were vague and formal, giving no real guidance. Each email seemed to add more confusion rather than clarity. The more they tried to explain their situation, the more they felt trapped in a web of rules they had never agreed to. Neighbors, who had been friendly at first, began to act differently. Some would whisper when they passed by, and a few gave the family looks that made them feel unwelcome. The parents could sense a quiet tension building in the neighborhood, though no one spoke openly about it. They tried to ignore it, hoping it was just a phase and that things would settle down over time. They focused on the children, making sure they felt safe and happy and on themselves, trying to find ways to enjoy their new home despite the growing unease. The kids, especially the teenage son, noticed the change in atmosphere immediately. He had always been curious and observant, and he could sense that something wasn't right. While the parents worried about letters and emails, he spent time watching the behavior of the HOA and neighbors, trying to understand why the family was suddenly being treated differently. He wasn't fully aware of all the rules yet, but he could tell that the family was being pushed into a situation that seemed unfair. He felt a mix of frustration and determination. He didn't like being told what to do, especially when the rules weren't clear, and he wanted to find a way to protect the family without causing more conflict. As the weeks went on, the letters from the HOA became more frequent. Each one seemed more urgent than the last, warning of fines and possible restrictions on their property. The language was always formal, sometimes threatening, but never fully explaining what the family needed to do to resolve the issues. The parents began to feel anxious every time they checked the mailbox. What had started as a dream home was slowly becoming a source of stress. They worried about the fines, the disputes, and the effect this constant pressure was having on their children. Sleep became harder, and conversations at the dinner table often revolved around what the next step would be, how to respond, and whether they were being treated fairly. The family tried to comply with what they thought the rules required. They moved cables, changed equipment, and even tried to get approvals that were suggested in the letters. But no matter what they did, the HOA seemed unsatisfied. Inspectors would come by at unexpected times, sometimes taking photos, sometimes leaving notes, occasionally knocking on the door to ask questions that didn't make sense. Each visit left the family more frustrated and more confused. They felt like they were being watched constantly, and that every minor detail was being scrutinized for compliance. It wasn't just about rules anymore. It felt personal. The teenage son began to study the letters and the HOA's rules carefully. He spent nights reading documents online, learning about property laws, and understanding the limits of what an HOA could demand. He became obsessed with finding a solution that would protect the family without escalating the conflict. While his parents were overwhelmed and worried about fines, he started to plan quietly, taking notes on every detail and thinking about ways to turn the situation around. His determination grew with every new letter, every visit, and every unfair demand. He refused to let the family be pushed around by vague threats and unclear rules. Meanwhile, parents tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for the children. They spent weekends exploring nearby parks, cooking meals together, and talking about happy memories. They wanted to make sure that the stress from the HOA didn't overshadow the joy of living in a new home. Yet the tension lingered like a shadow over every activity. Even simple tasks like checking emails or setting up internet devices became stressful, because every decision might trigger another warning. The family learned to move carefully, always thinking 2 steps ahead to avoid any trouble. Even when they weren't sure what the trouble might be, neighbors began to ask questions indirectly. Casual conversations turned into veiled warnings, and subtle comments suggested that the family was somehow different or problematic. The parents felt isolated, unsure who to trust, and weary of every interaction. The teenage son, however, noticed patterns that the adults missed. He realized that the HOA's approach was systematic, designed to intimidate and confuse rather than to truly enforce rules. This realization gave him a sense of purpose. He decided that he would find a way to protect the family, to restore peace, and to challenge the unfair treatment, without creating an open conflict that could make things worse. The first month in the house felt like a dream slipping away. The family had moved in with hopes of a fresh start, yet they were now caught in a struggle that seemed beyond their control. Every day brought new challenges, new letters, and new demands. But through it all, the family's bond remained strong. The parents supported each other, the children stayed close, and together they faced a situation that tested their patience, intelligence, and courage. The dream of a peaceful neighborhood was still alive, but it was hidden behind layers of stress and intimidation that the family needed to navigate carefully. In the evenings, the parents would sit together in the living room, reviewing letters and discussing the next steps. They sometimes argued, but always with the understanding that they were on the same side. The teenage son, meanwhile, would retreat to his room, studying the HOA's bylaws and reading about homeowner rights online. He began to understand that knowledge could be more powerful than confrontation, and that patience and strategy might be the key to overcoming the situation. His mind raced with ideas, planning a move that would change the course of their struggle. Despite the mounting stress, moments of lightness still occurred. The family laughed at small mistakes, shared stories from their past, supported each other in ways that reminded them why they had moved here in the first place. These moments were brief, but they strengthened their resolve. They realized that while the HOA could threaten and intimidate, could not break their family's unity or their determination to enjoy their home. The more pressure they faced, the more the teenage son became committed to finding a solution that would restore their peace. The first part of their journey in the new neighborhood ended with a sense of cautious awareness. The family knew that the challenges from the HOA were not over, and that every action they took would be scrutinized. They also knew that they were not powerless. The teenage son had begun to understand the rules, the loopholes, and the strategies that might protect them. The parents had learned to navigate the stress together, keeping the children safe and calm. And while the neighborhood had begun to feel less welcoming, the family's determination to stay, to fight if necessary, and to reclaim their peaceful life had only grown stronger. The battle was just beginning, but the family faced it together, ready to turn the tables when the right moment came. As days turned into weeks, the tension in the neighborhood grew heavier. The family tried to carry on with their daily lives, but the constant pressure from the HOA made everything feel unpredictable and stressful. Every knock on the door or letter in the mailbox caused anxiety, and the parents began to feel that they were under constant surveillance. They had hoped that the issues would resolve themselves if they stayed calm and compliant, but the warnings kept coming, each one more urgent than the last. The language in the letters was strict and formal, threatening fines or legal action, though it never fully explained what the family had done wrong or how to correct it. The more the family tried to comply, The more they realized that the HOA's rules were vague and often contradictory, the parents felt trapped. They had moved into this neighborhood to find peace and stability, but it seemed like their new home had become a source of tension and anxiety. They spent hours reading each letter, trying to understand the demands, and then adjusting their setup in small ways to appear compliant. They moved cables, changed the placement of equipment, and even tried to follow instructions that were unclear. Yet every time they thought they had solved the problem, a new warning would arrive, pointing out another supposed violation. The parents began to feel frustrated, powerless, increasingly concerned about how this constant stress was affecting their children. The teenage son, however, observed everything differently. He noticed patterns that the parents missed. Realizing that the HOA's actions were not just about enforcing rules, but about intimidating and confusing the residents, he started documenting each incident carefully, taking note of every letter, every visit. In every conversation with the HOA, he compared them to the official bylaws and regulations he found online. And soon, he began to see clear gaps between what the HOA demanded and what the rules actually allowed. He realized that most residents probably didn't understand these rules, which gave the HOA an unfair advantage. This understanding gave him a sense of control and purpose that the parents lacked at that moment. The family tried to maintain a sense of normal life despite the pressure. The parents continued with their work and household chores, while the children focused on school and personal hobbies. They spent time together in the evenings, talking about their day, sharing meals, and laughing whenever possible. But even in these moments, there was an underlying tension. They knew that each interaction, each simple action, could become a reason for the next warning letter. The parents tried to shield the children from worry, but it was impossible to hide the stress completely. The teenage son, in particular, felt a responsibility to protect the family. He often stayed up late researching legal rights, HOA regulations, and internet laws. He was determined to find a solution that would stop the harassment once and for all. One afternoon, the family received yet another letter, this time accusing them of failing to comply with the HOA's requirements. It claimed that their internet setup was unauthorized, and suggested that fines would be imposed if the situation was not corrected immediately. The parents were upset and confused. They had followed every suggestion the HOA had given them, and yet they were still being blamed. The situation felt unfair, and the stress began to weigh heavily on them. They talked about seeking advice from a lawyer, but even that seemed daunting. The HOA had a reputation for being strict, and the parents were concerned about escalating the situation and attracting more attention. The teenage son saw an opportunity in this challenge. While his parents felt cornered, he felt motivated. He began drafting a plan to handle the situation strategically. He documented every detail, the letters, the visits, and the conflicting rules. He researched the legal limits of HOA authority and noted instances where the association had overstepped its boundaries. He studied federal internet laws, learning what actions the HOA could and could not take against homeowners. He realized that knowledge was his most powerful tool and that he could use it to protect the family without engaging in open conflict. His plan was methodical, quiet, and calculated, and he worked on it in secret, wanting to reveal it only when it was fully ready. Meanwhile, the parents struggled to stay patient. The repeated warnings and inspections had begun to affect their health and mood. They experienced sleepless nights, headaches, and constant worry about fines or legal consequences. Everyday tasks became stressful. Even simple things like checking emails or paying bills were shadowed by the fear that the HOA would find a reason to punish them. They tried to remain positive for the children, reminding themselves that this was a temporary challenge and that they could navigate it together. Yet the tension was palpable. It seemed impossible to escape the constant pressure. Neighbors' behavior also shifted subtly. Some who had been friendly became distant or cold. Others whispered behind their backs or cast suspicious looks. The family felt isolated and began to question whether the community was truly welcoming. Despite this, a few neighbors reached out quietly, offering advice or sharing their own experiences with the HOA. These small gestures reminded the family that they were not completely alone. and they took comfort in the knowledge that others had faced similar struggles and survived. It reinforced the idea that they could find a solution if they approached the situation carefully and strategically. The teenage son's research continued late into the night. He compared every letter from the HOA with the official bylaws and regulations, noting inconsistencies and potential loopholes. He created a folder with all the documents organized by date and subject, so that if the situation escalated, the family would have a complete record. He also experimented with different ways to configure the internet setup, exploring options that would comply with the rules while still providing full access and speed for the family. His determination grew with each new obstacle. He knew that if he could find the right solution, it would not only solve the immediate problem, but also restore the family's peace and sense of control at home. The parents began to notice a change in their son. He was more focused, more confident, and increasingly involved in solving the family's challenges. They realized that his curiosity and intelligence were becoming their greatest asset. They encouraged him quietly, providing support and guidance when he asked for it. They also started paying more attention to their own understanding of the rules, learning from his research and discussions. Slowly, the family began to feel a small sense of empowerment, even in the midst of constant pressure. They knew that the fight was far from over, but they were beginning to understand that careful planning and knowledge could be more effective than confrontation. The next few weeks brought more tension as the HOA continued to send letters and occasionally made unannounced visits. Each encounter was nerve-wracking, but the family remained calm and composed, refusing to react emotionally. The teenage son's plan was taking shape. He was confident that it would address the issues without escalating the conflict. He practiced explaining the situation calmly and clearly, preparing for the moment when the family would need to present their solution. He knew that the key was patience, observation, and precision. Any mistake could give the HOA an opportunity to continue their harassment, so he focused on accuracy and thoroughness in every step. Despite the stress, the family still found moments of joy. They took weekend walks together, shared meals, and celebrated small victories. Like when a letter from the HOA was less threatening than usual, or when a neighbor smiled at them without suspicion. These moments reminded them of why they had moved to the neighborhood and strengthened their resolve to overcome the challenges. They realized that while the HOA could create tension and stress, it could not break the bonds between them or their determination to protect their home and each other. The teenage son's plan became more detailed and sophisticated. He created a step-by-step strategy to address every possible complaint the HOA could make. He prepared documentation, evidence, and explanations that were clear, concise, and supported by legal and technical knowledge. He also planned a way to implement changes to the internet setup that would be completely compliant with the rules, while demonstrating that the HOA's complaints were unnecessary. His approach was thoughtful, methodical, and careful, ensuring that every move would be legally sound and strategically effective. The family's evenings were often filled with discussions about the situation. But now, instead of feeling helpless, they felt engaged in problem-solving. The parents appreciated their son's insight and determination, and they actively participated in preparing for the next steps. They reviewed letters, double-checked equipment setups, and practiced how to respond to any future visits or warnings. The sense of empowerment began to replace the feelings of anxiety and helplessness that had dominated the previous weeks. As the second part of their journey unfolded, the family realized that the HOA's attempts to intimidate them had not succeeded in breaking their spirit. Instead, it had inspired the teenage son to develop a plan that could turn the situation around. The parents had learned to navigate the stress together, supporting each other and their children while remaining calm and strategic. The family was beginning to feel that the battle was not only winnable, but that they could emerge stronger and more confident. The tension remained, but the fear was slowly giving way to determination, and the family's unity became their greatest strength. The days were still long, and the challenges were far from over, but the family faced each new obstacle with growing confidence. They knew that the HOA's rules were sometimes vague and unfair, but they also knew that knowledge, preparation, and careful planning could protect them. The teenage son's research and strategic thinking gave them a sense of control that they had never experienced before. Every letter, every visit, and every warn, the teenage son became more deeply involved in the situation as the days passed. Every moment he spent observing the HOA, analyzing letters, and reviewing the official rules brought new insights. He realized that most residents accepted everything the HOA said without question, which gave the association unchecked power. This knowledge made him determined to take action, but carefully. He knew that the wrong move could make things worse, and he did not want to escalate the situation. Instead, he focused on creating a plan that would be smart, legal, and undeniable. His room became a small office of research filled with printed documents, notebooks, and diagrams of the home network setup. Each page represented a piece of a puzzle that, when solved, would protect the family from harassment. The family continued to feel the strain, but they noticed a change in the son's behavior. He was no longer just reactive. He was thinking ahead, planning carefully, and taking control of the situation. His focus inspired the parents, who began to see possibilities they hadn't considered. They started reviewing the HOA letters together, cross-checking with the bylaws and discussing the legal and technical aspects of the situation. It became a family effort, even though the son led the strategy. Conversations at dinner, which had once been filled with worry and frustration, were now filled with ideas, analysis, and brainstorming solutions. The energy in the home shifted slightly from stress to purpose. The parents still felt occasional frustration and fear, especially when an inspector arrived without notice, or when a new letter threatened fines. But the teenage son's calm and detailed explanations helped them remain composed. He showed them how to respond to each letter, how to document every interaction, and how to prepare evidence that demonstrated their compliance. He taught them the importance of staying polite, factual, and patient. They learned that reacting emotionally would give the HOA a chance to continue their intimidation. By observing the son's careful planning, the parents realized that control came from knowledge and preparation rather than confrontation. The son also began experimenting with different configurations of the home network. He explored every technical option to ensure that the setup would comply with the HOA's demands. Even when the rules were vague or contradictory, he documented each adjustment and its impact, creating a step-by-step record of compliance. At the same time, he studied federal and local regulations regarding internet services. Learning where the HOA's authority ended, this dual approach, technical and legal, gave him confidence that they could finally turn the situation around. He imagined the moment when the family could implement the final setup and prove that the HOA's complaints were unnecessary, leaving the association stunned. Meanwhile, the community atmosphere remained tense. Some neighbors continued to whisper or cast suspicious glances, while others avoided interaction entirely. The family felt the subtle isolation, but chose to focus on their internal strength. They continued weekend activities together, exploring nearby parks, cooking meals, and enjoying small moments of laughter. These times reminded them why they had chosen this neighborhood in the first place. They were determined to reclaim peace and normalcy, and these moments of connection reinforced their commitment to each other. The HOA's letters became slightly more formal and urgent as they escalated complaints. They cited vague violations and threatened fines, inspections, and restrictions on services. The parents, although still stressed, now approached each letter with the son's guidance. They reviewed the content carefully, prepared responses that were factual and clear, and documented everything meticulously. They learned to see the letters not as threats, but as opportunities to demonstrate compliance and expose inconsistencies in the HOA's claims. The sense of empowerment grew steadily with each action they took at night. The teenage son would retreat to his room to refine his plan. He created diagrams of the home, mapped out where equipment should be placed, considered alternative setups that would eliminate any potential violation. He cross-referenced the HOA's bylaws with federal rules, noting every area where the HOA lacked authority. He practiced explaining the plan to his parents, ensuring they could communicate clearly and confidently if needed. His focus was unwavering, and he approached the situation with a maturity that impressed the family. They began to trust his judgment entirely. Feeling relief that someone had a clear path forward, the son's planning included not only technical adjustments but also a strategy for dealing with potential objections. From the HOA, he anticipated their arguments, prepared counterpoints, and developed evidence that would demonstrate compliance beyond doubt. He also thought about timing, knowing that the moment to implement the final setup had to be perfect. The approach was slow, deliberate, and meticulous, designed to prevent escalation while asserting the family's rights. The thought of finally restoring peace and ending the harassment motivated him to work tirelessly, even sacrificing sleep to ensure everything was perfect. The parents began to feel a mixture of relief and pride. Their son's determination and intelligence were inspiring, and they realized that the family was not powerless. They learned from his research, helping to organize documents, track correspondence, and even suggest adjustments to the home environment. The family became a united team, focused on strategy and preparation rather than fear. The once overwhelming situation was now something they could manage, with a clear plan to achieve victory. The house, which had felt tense and oppressive, slowly regained a sense of purpose and calm. As the days went on, the son shared small insights with the family, demonstrating that some of the HOA's demands were unnecessary or beyond their authority. Each revelation strengthened the family's confidence and determination. They began to understand that the key was not confrontation, but clarity, preparation, and strategic action. By documenting every detail and making careful adjustments, they were creating an undeniable record that protected them from unfair claims. The tension remained, but fear was gradually replaced by empowerment. The community continued to be a mixed environment. Some neighbors remained distant, unsure how to respond to the family's situation. Others offered subtle support, quietly sharing their own experiences and advice. The family learned to navigate these social dynamics carefully, maintaining politeness and composure while staying focused on their plan. They realized that social pressure was a factor, but it could not dictate their actions or undermine their strategy. They chose to engage only when necessary, and two, focus primarily on preparation and compliance. The teenage son's dedication remained steadfast. He spent hours each day reviewing documents, experimenting with network setups, and refining his strategy. He even created mock scenarios, practicing how the family would respond if the HOA made additional complaints. His preparation included every possible detail, from technical adjustments to written responses and even polite verbal explanations. He wanted to ensure that the family would be ready for any challenge, and that their actions would be legally and technically sound. The parents watched with admiration, seeing their son grow into a thoughtful, strategic problem solver who could protect the family from intimidation. The family's daily life continued alongside the planning. They attended school events, worked from home, and completed household tasks, all while managing the stress of the HOA's actions. They learned to balance normal routines with strategic preparation, creating a sense of normalcy despite the ongoing pressure. The parents encouraged their children to enjoy small pleasures, reinforcing the idea that life should not be consumed entirely by conflict. These moments of balance helped maintain the family's morale and focus. One day, the family received a particularly harsh letter from the HOA, threatening fines and repeated inspections. The parents felt the familiar anxiety, but the teenage son remained calm. He reviewed the letter carefully, highlighting sections that were vague or contradictory, and explained to his parents how they could respond. His calm, methodical approach reassured the family and allowed them to act without panic. They drafted a clear, concise response, supported by evidence and references to the official bylaws. The satisfaction of having a plan in place and being able to respond effectively brought a sense of relief and confidence. As the third part of their journey unfolded, the family felt stronger and more capable. The teenage son's research, planning, and quiet determination had given them a path forward. The parents' support and willingness to learn from him created a unified team, capable of addressing challenges strategically. The stress and tension from the HOA were still present, but they were no longer paralyzing. The family had transformed from passive recipients of harassment into empowered, prepared individuals ready to take control. They understood that patience, knowledge, and careful planning were their strongest tools. And they were prepared to implement their strategy when the time was right. The days continued with preparation, observation, and careful adjustment. The family learned to anticipate challenges, document every detail, and act strategically. The teenage son remained the guiding force, but the parents and younger children played active roles, supporting the plan and maintaining a sense of normalcy. Each day brought new insights, reinforced their confidence, and strengthened their unity. The sense of fear that had dominated the early weeks had been replaced by determination, knowledge, and careful action. They were ready for the moment when the final move would secure their home, protect their rights, and finally silence the unnecessary pressure from the HOA. The teenage son had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Every detail had been analyzed, every scenario considered, and every loophole documented. He knew that the final move had to be precise and undeniable, leaving the HOA with no room to argue. The family had continued living their daily lives, attending work, school, and household responsibilities, but the underlying tension was always there, reminding them that the HOA's scrutiny could return at any moment. The son's careful planning, however, had brought a sense of confidence that the parents had never felt before. They began to see that the family could reclaim control of their home and finally silence the constant pressure. One morning, the family received yet another letter from the HOA, claiming that their internet setup was non-compliant and warning that fines would be imposed. If immediate action was not taken, the parents felt a familiar wave of anxiety, but the teenage son remained calm. He reviewed the letter carefully, highlighting the vague and contradictory statements. He explained to his parents how the HOA had overstepped its authority and how the threats were legally unenforceable. His confidence reassured them, and they realized that the time to act had come. The plan he had developed over weeks was ready to be implemented, and the family was prepared to follow it exactly as he had instructed. The family gathered in the living room, and the son walked them through the plan step by step. He explained how they would adjust the internet setup to comply fully with the HOA's requirements, while also documenting every change to create a clear record of compliance. He showed them how to organize letters, emails, and notes so that they could respond quickly and accurately to any future inquiries. His instructions were precise and methodical, leaving no room for error. The parents listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions to ensure they understood every aspect of the plan. There was a sense of anticipation and determination in the room, a feeling that they were finally taking control of a situation that had caused so much stress for weeks. The technical adjustments were the first step. The son carefully moved cables, adjusted equipment placement, and configured the network to meet the HOA's vague specifications. He documented each step with photographs and written notes, creating a record that could not be disputed. The parents, assisted by organizing the documents, keeping track of letters, and ensuring that everything was accurate. The process took several hours, but the family worked together, turning a stressful task into a collaborative effort. As they completed each step, a sense of relief began to replace the anxiety that had been building for weeks. Once the technical adjustments were complete, the family focused on the documentation. The son created a detailed folder containing all correspondence with the HOA, photographs of the equipment setup, and notes explaining how each adjustment complied with the rules. He also included references to the official bylaws and federal regulations, highlighting areas where the HOA's demands were overreaching. The folder was organized in a way that made it easy to understand and impossible to dispute. The parents reviewed the materials carefully, ensuring that every detail was accurate and complete. The sense of preparation gave the family confidence that they could face any challenge from the HOA without fear. The next step was communication. The son drafted a polite, factual letter to the HOA, explaining the adjustments that had been made and providing the documentation to demonstrate compliance. The letter was clear, professional, and respectful, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The parents reviewed the letter and approved it, feeling a sense of empowerment that had been missing for weeks. They knew that this approach would not only address the immediate concerns, but also establish a strong record in case the HOA attempted to escalate the situation further. The family felt a renewed sense of control and determination as they prepared to send the letter. Once the letter was sent, the family waited with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. They knew that the HOA might respond, but they also knew that they had followed the rules meticulously and documented every step. The son reassured his parents that the evidence was clear, that any further complaints would be difficult for the HOA to justify. The parents felt a sense of relief, knowing that the family had taken action in a way that was both strategic and legally sound. The tension that had dominated the previous weeks began to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism that they could finally achieve peace in their home. In the days that followed, the family maintained their normal routines while observing the neighborhood for any signs of further scrutiny. The HOA did not immediately respond, and the absence of further threats brought a sense of relief. The parents began to relax, realizing that the family's careful planning had worked. The teenage son continued to monitor the situation, prepared to respond if necessary, but the sense of fear and anxiety had diminished significantly. The family began to enjoy their home again, spending time together, laughing, and reconnecting with the sense of peace they had sought. When they first moved in, the family also noticed changes in the neighborhood. Some neighbors who had been distant or suspicious began to engage more openly, asking about the family's experience and offering support. The parents shared their story cautiously, emphasizing the importance of patience, preparation, and strategic action. The teenage son's approach had not only protected the family, it also served as an example of how knowledge and careful planning could overcome intimidation. The community began to see that the family's response was thoughtful, respectful, and effective, rather than confrontational or aggressive. As the weeks passed, the family continued to document and organize their records, maintaining a clear and accurate account of all interactions with the HOA. This ongoing effort ensured that they would be prepared for any future challenges and reinforced the sense of control and empowerment they had gained. The parents felt proud of their son's intelligence and dedication, recognizing that his careful planning and strategic thinking had been the key to restoring peace in their home. The teenage son, in turn, felt a sense of accomplishment and responsibility. Knowing that his efforts had protected the family and proven the value of patience, observation, and preparation, the family's experience also strengthened their relationships with each other. The challenges they had faced together had required communication, trust, and collaboration, reinforcing the bonds within the household. The parents appreciated the son's guidance and leadership, and the children learned the importance of careful planning, strategic thinking, and perseverance. The family emerged from the experience with a deeper sense of unity and resilience, better equipped to handle future challenges both inside and outside the home. The final step in the son's plan involved a subtle demonstration of compliance and control. He carefully monitored the network setup and documented its performance, showing that the family's internet was functioning efficiently while fully adhering to the HOA's rules. He also prepared a clear, concise summary of all adjustments and documentation, ready to present if the HOA attempted further complaints. This proactive approach left no room for doubt and reinforced the family's position. The sense of accomplishment was profound as the family realized that they had successfully turned a stressful, intimidating situation into an opportunity to demonstrate knowledge, preparation, and resilience. By the end of this phase, the family felt a renewed sense of confidence and security in their home. The HOA's attempts to intimidate and control had been met with careful, strategic action that left the association with no room to maneuver. The parents felt proud of their son's intelligence, his dedication, and leadership, recognizing that his efforts had been instrumental in restoring peace. The teenage son felt a sense of satisfaction and responsibility, knowing that his careful planning and strategic thinking had protected the family and demonstrated the power of patience and preparation. The family's story began to inspire others in the neighborhood. Neighbors who had witnessed the situation with curiosity and concern began to see the value of knowledge, careful planning, and strategic action. The parents shared lessons learned with trusted friends and acquaintances, emphasizing the importance of staying calm, documenting interactions, and understanding one's rights. The experience became a testament to the family's resilience and determination, showing that even in the face of intimidation and uncertainty, careful preparation and thoughtful action could restore peace and control. As the days turned into weeks, the family continued to enjoy their home with a renewed sense of confidence. The tension that had once dominated their lives had been replaced by empowerment, knowledge, and a sense of accomplishment. The teenage son's meticulous planning, strategic thinking, and leadership had transformed a stressful situation into an opportunity for growth and learning. The parents felt proud, the children felt secure, and the family as a whole emerged stronger, more united, and better prepared for the future. The HOA, faced with undeniable evidence of compliance and careful documentation, ceased its attempts to intimidate the family. The letters stopped, inspections became less frequent, and the neighborhood returned to a sense of normalcy. The family had successfully navigated a challenging situation, demonstrating the power of patience, preparation, and strategic thinking. The sense of peace and security that had once seemed elusive was finally restored, and the family could fully enjoy their home and community without fear or anxiety. Through this experience, the family learned valuable lessons about resilience, empowerment, and the importance of knowledge. They discovered that even in the face of intimidation and unfair treatment, careful planning, strategic action, and clear communication could restore control and peace. The teenage son's leadership and dedication had been crucial, showing that determination, intelligence, and thoughtful action could aid.